Every year, I take people to the Van and Bitlis provinces in Turkey, and we look at the carvings left behind by the Iron Age Urartian people. Their cuneiform inscriptions and the symbology of their carvings tells a story of positive contact with non-human others who came and intervened in the human story at a time when our survival on planet Earth hung in the balance. And there are indigenous cultures all around the world that say that our survival and our leaps forward into megalithic building, into agricultural science, were the gifts of contact with non-human intelligence in the deep past. In the Eden Enigma, I show that our Iron Age ancestors looked forward to the return of the non-human beings their ancestors had known because of all the advantages of technology sharing that had resulted from that contact. And if you'd like to stand in the landscape where so many of these origin stories converge, the lands around Lake Van, the lands of modern Turkey and ancient Armenia, the place many traditions point to as the reboot of civilization, I take a group there every year because standing in the place itself is very different to reading a story. If you'd like to join me in the Van province, go to ancientknowledgetours.com. Wherever you are in your journey, whether you're just curious or if you're redefining how you understand humanity, you are very welcome to continue your exploration with me. Today, I'm in conversation with Aleksander Czeszkiewicz. He's a great friend of The Fifth Kind and the Paul Wallis channel. He's a Polish scholar and author of Deja Vu, which is a book on my bookshelf. And the subtitle of that book says, "Has everything already been in search of a previous lost civilization?" Oleg, welcome to the Paul Wallis channel.
Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate that.
It's a pleasure. Now, we've had many conversations before. This is the first time I've welcomed you to the Paul Wallis channel, but we've had lots of conversations about previous civilizations, esoteric history, and I wanted to begin by asking you what it was that first took you in this direction. How did you go from being an average guy down this rabbit hole of saying, there's something that's really important that people don't know that's driven you? I mean, to write a book this thick, you've got to be very motivated, and to do the study that you do, which is phenomenal, you have to have a real fire in your belly. So what was it that lit that fire for you?
I had this fire. It was actually a crazy journey, but also I would say some kind of spiritual awakening. And as you've said, I think it's a good term. I was a casual guy before. I would even consider myself to a large extent atheist, rationalist, not materialist. So I was very heavily into science. My mom was also a historian, so I had plenty of advanced literature at home. I had plenty of textbooks, plenty of resources. And it was back then that I started asking basic questions. How do we know our history happened in this particular way? How do we know that ancient Sumerians were the first civilizations? So I started asking these questions, and I think that we have like this so pristine view of our history. Okay, we know so much about even certain particular rulers in this Sumerian dynasty or in this Assyrian dynasty, etc. But when you actually go study further and go study the sources on which all of this knowledge is based on, you will see that what we know about our history, especially the ancient or prehistoric times, it's like a drop of water in the ocean.
That interest in history and that curious mind and that skepticism is something you inherited from your mum and something that she's encouraged you in. It was similar for me as well. I think it was my mum who really noticed my curiosity, and she bought me books to encourage that. I remember she bought me The World Atlas of Mysteries by Francis Hitching, and then a book, Supernature, to encourage me to keep asking questions. So we've both been very lucky in our early years to have that encouraged. And as you embarked on this journey, bringing skepticism and curiosity to the mainstream stories, What were the first things that got your attention?
By my own research, I found out that one of the leading genetic theories about the origins of anatomically modern humans showed that we existed for about 200,000 years. And when parallel to that, I was learning that history started, let's say, at Sumer about 6,000 years ago. 6,000 years, 200,000 years. It is like 5-6% of our entire existence. So I asked a question, what if there was a civilization, let's say 10,000 BC, 30,000 BC, 50,000 BC? I thought it was very, very possible that that was the case. So I started searching and searching. Most of the first cultures that we think were the first civilizations, ancient Sumerians, ancient Egyptians, ancient India people from the Harappa and Mohenjo-daro Indus civilization, all of them thought that they weren't the first. We considered right now them to be the first. All of them were telling that they are either much older as a civilization, the famous Sumerian kings list, the famous Egyptian kings list, or that they had origins in a previous civilization. They were much closer to these prehistoric times that we are today. So maybe they knew something more that right now we do not know. It's common knowledge, academic knowledge, that probably we diverged from previous hominids 500,000 years ago. So 500,000 years ago and 5,000, 6,000 years of civilization is like nothing. Till the 1840s, most of the ancient Mesopotamian civilizations, like Assyrians, Babylonians, Akkadians, Sumerians, etc. But up until the 1840s, when the first excavations happened on the Mesopotamian region, these civilizations were basically mythical. Just as right now Atlantis is considered by mainstream scientists mythical. If then less than 200 years ago, in the 1840s and before that, all of them were considered mythical, and right now we see there were huge civilizations, and it's common knowledge that they existed. Maybe in the next 50 or 100 years, we will find some remnants of lost civilization that was before. And we may again shift the roots of civilization back by another few thousand or maybe a few tens of thousands of years.
In October, you and I are going to be in Turkey, and I'm really looking forward to having you join me on the Ancient Knowledge Tour and showing you some absolutely fascinating archaeological sites. We're in the Armenian Highlands. And so I wanted to ask you what it was that first drew your attention in that direction. When did you first realize that ancient Armenia had something to say to all these threads that you were following?
I think it is one of the most important regions of the entire planet when it comes to the origins of humanity, especially origins of civilization, both from the academic perspective, because we now know the first switch from nomadic, hunter-gatherer, primitive lifestyle of humans into the beginnings of cities and then civilizations happened not in Mesopotamia, but it happened both on highlands and in the mountainous areas. And we know it right now from biological studies. We know that the first domesticated grains needed to be found in these highland areas and mountainous areas on the northern part of Mesopotamia, and then they were brought back to the lowlands, to the alluvial lands between the famous twin rivers, Mesopotamia, Tigris and Euphrates. So I think it's important from this kind of perspective of the mainstream, even archaeology and prehistory, it's not even history back then, but also from ancestral narratives, and lots of them point that this region was some kind of cradle of mankind.
The whole of the Ararat region is the high country. It is the highlands. It's referenced that way in the book of Ezekiel. It's in the high country that the garden of the Elohim is placed. It's there in the story of Ziusudra. The oldest map that we know, the Babylonian map of the world, says this is where Ziusudra landed after the great deluge, and it points to the Ararat region. And of course, the deep story of Armenia always said that their people are descended from Noah, whose ark, whatever that ark was, came to rest in this same region. And you've got other vectors pointing here as well. You can read classical authors, Roman and Greek historians and poets who would talk about the Ararat region. They would talk about ancient Armenia as the place where
the Iron Age began, where there was a great leap forward in the human story. So you've got agricultural science emerging, you've got iron technology emerging. And as we trace the movement of agricultural science, you're also tracing the movement of megalithic building. We are looking at an epicenter in terms of a relaunch or a reboot of the human experience on Earth. It's not necessarily the beginning of the first ever civilization on Earth, but it is the beginning of civilization as we know it when we're looking at these deep stories of the region. And another vector that points to ancient Armenia is that of Norse mythology, which we know a great deal about through the writings in the 1200s of Snorri Sturluson. He was a post-Viking chieftain who tells us what we know about the Aesir. And he said that the Aesir were an advanced culture who came from Assaland. And Assaland is what today we would call ancient Armenia. They somehow were more advanced than their Northern European neighbors and their Scandinavian neighbors. It's why they were able to go in, led by Odin, and take those lands with ease. And so there's the question of who are they? Where exactly are they? And we're given a clue in those stories by Snorri Sturluson when he says that their local rivals, the rivals of the Aesir from Assaland, were the Vanir from Vanland. And that's exactly where you and I are going in October. We're going to Vanland, the land of the Van people, the Biainili, the region around Lake Van. So these were their neighbors. And so we've got Snorri Sturluson as well saying there was a leap forward here that then migrated into Northern Europe, the Baltic states, into Scandinavia. And he pointed to evidence in the real world for this great migration. He pointed to evidence in the movement of language to show that these connections were real world and they weren't purely, mythical, fabulous, fictional stories.
We know very well that Europeans, there were two influxes. One was from the southern part, Mediterranean proto-civilizations. It is historically, archaeologically accurate that people from these regions were actually giving technology, because Europe was very primitive, because it were times that it was mostly very cold in Europe, there were harsh conditions, people were hunter-gatherers here for much longer, even thousands of years after Neolithic Revolution. But here in Europe it was still prehistory, so we call it proto-history, and we know that there were several influxes from these regions to Europe, with technology, with language, with even mythology, different kinds of legends. Right now there is in history, in archaeology, in prehistorical research, this switch onto these kind of regions.
There are some particular sites that while you're there, you'll definitely want to see. And so when Matt was there scouting for his movie, The Missing Key, I went along with him and found what was left behind in the Iron Age by the Biainili people speaks to all the questions that you and I have about humanity's deeper history. And so when you come on the tour in October, Oleg, I'll be showing you Urartian inscriptions and carved symbols and architectural evidence of the stories that were told 3,000 years ago by the Biainili people, the Urartian people. And I'm going to show you evidence that those stories take us thousands of years prior to the Iron Age, and I believe back to the period just after the most recent extinction level event on the northern side of the planet, which is the Younger Dry Skull period.
We started like 500, 400 years ago with this idea that probably Rome and Greece were the first, but then we heard that Greeks were fighting with the Persians. And actually, while discovering ancient Persian civilization, we found the famous Behistan's tale of the Darius the Great. It was the Rosetta Stone of the Mesopotamia of the East that helped us to decode the ancient cuneiform inscription, and it led us further to explore Mesopotamia. So this was how the discoveries were happening. So from Greece to Persia, from Persia to Mesopotamia, and right now it's shifting towards Persia, Armenia, Caucasus. These are called Proto or pra-Indo-Europeans. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, there is this beast called Humbaba, which is very similar to the Minotaur of the ancient Greece. It isn't that the ancient Minoans, ancient Greeks took directly from Mesopotamia, from the ancient Sumerians and Akkadians, but probably this was a much older myth from maybe the cradle of human culture, maybe not civilization, but culture. And then it spread towards Greece and towards Mesopotamia. So actually we are shifting towards such regions. That's why I'm very excited about going there, because there is this mythological Mount Meru, the center of the world in the ancient Indian mythology of plenty of ages, both ancient and then later medieval. And some people actually tell us that it was not especially the Himalayan mountains, but maybe actually the regions of Armenia, Caucasus. This was the cradle of civilization. If I want to tackle these huge mysteries and huge questions about our ancient times, even within the mainstream narrative and within the mainstream science, I need to go to the east and I need to go to these sites. So I think it's a little bit of synchronicity that right now we are going there, and I think it's very, very cool.
When you come on the tour in October, what questions about the deep story of humanity are you hoping that the sites we visit are going to speak to? What are you hoping to find that will inform your view?
I'm hoping first to find how old are these sites really, because maybe lots of these sites were being built during the Iron Age, Urartian civilization, which we know was like very big civilization, was a dominant one before being completely destroyed by the Assyrians. We find mentions of Lake Van regions that were very important and known already to the ancient Sumerians about 3000 BC. Just as ancient Sumer may be the cradle of civilization, writing system, agriculture, hierarchical society, but at the same time, about 3000 BC, there was already something very advanced in the Urartian region, parallel to the ancient Sumerians. And the first question would be how old all of that is. Could it be that it's much older? And as you've said, maybe even coming to the age of the Younger Dryas, last ice age, or maybe even before that? Was it a civilization just after the flood in connections to mythologies, or maybe it was even pre-flood or something? And the second one would be about the myths, because I'm tracing the origins of the myths, and we are again dating the myths, as I've said in this example of Minotaur and Humbaba. We are putting them thousands of years before we originally thought they were. So the other question would be about myths. Is there any evidence of this transmission of mythology, of legends that have their parallels in different cultures, like ancient Mesopotamia, maybe Europe, maybe the Mediterranean region? So this would be my other question.
These are great questions to bring with you, Oleg, because there's so much you're going to see that speaks to both of those questions. So with timelines and the question of what was there before, the Urartian period is a really interesting one to look at. So we're looking at the Iron Age, we're looking at a time when a group of tribes who I believe were indigenous to the Armenian Highlands banded together to protect their territory. And so they became a united kingdom of the Biaynili, the Van people, the Urartians. And one of the early kings of the United Kingdom of Van, Arjishti, he conquered a city. And when he writes an inscription on the city that he created on top of the one that was there before, he's very open, and he talks about the battle that was had and how they won this territory, and now it's Urartian territory, and he's very proud to say this was a great victory. But when we look at the sites of Ioannis, for instance, in Chavas-Tepe, so we're looking at his descendants, King Sarduri in Chavas-Tepe and King Rusa in Ioannis, when they put their inscriptions on their citadels, the claims they make are, there was nothing here when we built these citadels. And Arjisti says something very similar in Yerevan, which is now the capital of Armenia. He said, there was nothing here. This was barren land, and we, by the grace of the great Dingir Haldi and Teshaba and the other Dingir, with their assistance, by their grace, we transformed this into fertile farmland. All the inscriptions we're going to see talk about this deep story, this agricultural revolution. There was nothing here before. It was barren land. We turned it into fertile farmland. we created this citadel when there was nothing here. Now, what's mysterious about that is that we know there were people living here before that period, and this had been a strategically important place before that period. Any people group living in this region would need something on the elevated sites simply to defend their country, to defend their farms. And so when Sarduri and Rusa and Argisti say there was nothing here before, we have to question what they mean. Do they mean there were no buildings? Do they mean there was no castle? They might have found ruins and still said there was nothing here. But it's very difficult to believe there was absolutely nothing, given how strategically important these sites were and how long this had been a vital node in what became the Fertile Crescent. So these timeline questions are really interesting. And when we go to Çavuştepe and Kefkalesi and Ioannis, we will obviously be looking at what is there, what are the megalithic remains, and do they speak to a single building culture? Is there any evidence of a building culture previously? What stories are told by the inscriptions, and then what stories are told by the symbols? And there are a couple of things that point to an older story. And one, just to whet your appetite, when we go to Çavuştepe, we're going to a site that originally would have had two sanctuaries in it, two sushi temples, as they're known. So one to Haldi and one to Irmushini, and one is fairly intact, but the other has been absolutely obliterated. And there's been a rebuilding at some point in limestone, but the original basalt construction is obliterated to the point where you've only got tiny fragments of basalt left. And I remember standing on that site with Dr. Robert Schoch, the famous geologist, and his jaw dropped when he realized what we were looking at. And we began asking questions. When was the most recent event that could have produced an explosion such as the one we seemed to be finding evidence of on that site? And so we started asking timeline questions around that. And then there are timeline questions thrown up by the lake itself. When did the lake form? How quickly did the waters rise? And therefore, how old are the megalithic remains underneath the waters today? This is something that's really an open question. And then the symbols themselves, they're telling stories that correlate to periods of history. And we're going to be trying to decode that together on the tour with all those who join us in October. And when we go to Van City, I'll take you to the Van City Museum, and I want to show you a bronze shield and see what you make of it, because the bronze shield tells an astrological story that connects astrology with the mythologies. And it begins to put, I believe, dates on the ancient stories the Iron Age people were telling. So you were saying earlier, you go back 6,000 years to ancient Sumer, and the stories they're telling are of thousands of years before. And I believe that this artifact shows the same thing. We can go back to the Iron Age, look at the stories they tell, and this shield I'm going to show you shows that these stories belong to thousands of years before, to just after the Younger Dryas Cold period. So it's another vector pointing back to that time and suggesting the deep stories are all about what happened at that time, before the Urartian period, before their predecessors' period, back to that time when humanity was at a real turning point.
I have 3 short comments to what you are talking. I'm very, very interested, and I can't wait to actually go there this autumn. But first, you've mentioned that in these inscriptions, the kings say there was nothing here, it was barren land, we built everything. I've learned different rulers are legitimizing. Oh, in the ancient times, there was a god who to my grandfather said, you are the king, and he was chosen by the god, and I'm from the lineage of these kings, or maybe we're the ancient rulers. So this is the one version. But the other one is that I am the greatest kings. Before me there was nothing. Like here in Poland we have a king who claimed, oh, I came here, but these regions were only wooden. Everything, all the architecture was wooden. And I came, and when I am going away, it's all built out of stone. This is the second version of legitimization, that there was nothing, I'm the great king, I built everything, so maybe?
No, this is a very, very sensible question. I asked that same question about Rus's claim and Sarduri's claim when they said there was nothing here before. And then I found out Jishti had made the same claim. But the thing that makes me wonder is that Arjishti was willing to acknowledge previous cultures when he had beaten them. So it just raises that question. If he was willing to say this city was originally someone else's, then maybe they weren't as dishonest as I at first thought. But they were certainly doing what you describe in one respect, because in all the inscriptions, they talk about the Dingir, these advanced beings, Aldi, his consort Arabani, Teshaba, Hituini, Suini, Shivini, as if they were all mates. So they've got these deep stories of these advanced beings that I believe were thousands of years old. But when it comes to the inscriptions, they'll say, Isaduri, with the help of Haldian Irmushini, and he's putting all their names into the same story. It's a way of legitimizing their kingship. They are mates with the great Dingir of legend. It's the great Dingir who helped them and established them. They're all part of the same story. And when we begin our tour in October, we're going to begin it in Istanbul. And we're going to go to some of the great cultural sites there. And we'll see how the Roman emperors who ruled from Istanbul, I mean, it's interesting, a lot of Westerners forget that some of the most famous Roman emperors didn't govern from Rome, they governed from what is today Istanbul. And when we go to Hagia Sophia and we look at the iconography that has been allowed to survive in that place, we will see Roman emperors doing exactly the same thing, because it will be the emperor, the empress, Jesus, and Mary, all in the same room, all in the same picture, because they're all mates. That's how close they are with the incarnate Son of God. And it's the same thing, that if you worship Jesus and his mum, then you will venerate the emperor, because we're all part of the divine order of society. And so you see that done in iconography in Istanbul. And then when we get to the inscriptions at Chavez-Tepe, Ioannis, and when we look at other examples, such as in Yerevan, we realize they're all doing the same thing. And they're all expressing this idea of the divine right of kings, that they've inherited their right to rule from these advanced beings called Dingir from the deep past.
I can't wait for the Istanbul too, because most heresies that were later spread over Western Europe came after the Crusades. Crusaders were coming back with these mystical ideas through Bulgaria, through Armenia. Armenia was one of the cradle of the heresies that later became in Western Europe, Cathars, Albigenses, etc. So a key part of history, both when it comes to mystical spiritual ideas, but also when it comes to the knowledge of the East, that if it wasn't for the Byzantine Empire, it would have been completely lost.
In October, I'm going to take you and the group to Mount Nemrut. Now, there are two Mount Nemruts in Turkey. The one we're going to is one where the top of the mountain was blown off by a volcanic explosion. And so the top has been sheared off, and then the sides of the volcano have caved in. You can see the story in the landscape. Then to go and stand there. And it's quite an ominous feeling standing on the edge of what's called the caldera, where the edges of the mountain have collapsed into, it's not the crater really, because the top of the mountain has just gone. And it's especially poignant because it was one of two volcanic explosions that created Lake Van. And Lake Van is the lake that defines the fertility of this whole region. The cuneiform we're going to be looking at is a Syrian cuneiform, but the language that it's representing is the Urartian language, which we're still learning. We're still learning to translate it, so there's some mystery around it. When we go to Chavez Tepe, we're going to meet Mehmet Kushman, who's one of a tiny handful of people who have learned to read Urartian in Assyrian cuneiform. And it's been my great pleasure to meet him a couple of times, and God willing, he'll be there to meet with our group and do some translation work with us. He's in his 80s. He's been on the site working there since the 1960s. He's an incredible person. And so we'll meet him. We'll meet the lead archaeologist, Professor Rafet Kafashoglu.
It's very interesting, and I'm looking forward to meeting the scientists who were working there, and especially this 80-year-old man who can translate everything of it. So I think it will be a great part of our expedition.
If you would like to join the Ancient Knowledge Tour this October, we're going from the 8th to the 18th of October, 10 days immersion in these ancient cultures, going to these fabulous archaeological sites, which are live excavations. So we will be meeting the lead archaeologists in each of these places. Professor Rafet Kafashoglu at Chavez Tepe, Professor Ismail Koshkun at the Van University at Kefkalesi, Professor Mehmet Ishikli, who looks after the incredible site at Ayanas, Omar Tanyurek, who looks after these incredible artifacts retrieved from Kefkalesi. See what has been unearthed since the last time I was there. This will be my 4th visit in 2 years. Every time I go, something new has been excavated. So if you want to be part of this experience, then you can join me and Oleg on this tour, October 8th to 18th. Go to ancientknowledgetours.com, scroll down to the middle of the page, and you can expand an interactive brochure and flick through the pages of the brochure. It gives you a day-by-day detailed breakdown of what we're going to be doing on this tour. And then on the page, it will show you how you can secure your place on the tour. We do have some places left, and it would be fantastic if you could join us and share this experience with us.